It was supposed to be the perfect family vacation, a week-long cruise through the Caribbean, filled with sunshine, laughter, and memories that would last a lifetime. Sarah had planned every detail carefully, making sure her husband, David, and their 6-year-old daughter, Emily, would have an unforgettable experience. The ship was massive, a floating city with pools, theaters, and endless activities. From the moment they boarded, Emily's excitement was contagious, her little hands gripping her father's as she pointed out every new discovery. The first few days were a dream. They spent mornings by the pool, afternoons exploring the ship, and evenings watching the sun sink into the horizon as the ocean stretched endlessly around them. David, always the cautious one, kept a close eye on Emily, never letting her wander too far. Sarah felt safe, surrounded by other families, the ship's crew, and the knowledge that nothing bad could possibly happen in a place so full of life. But everything changed on the 5th night. It was just past midnight when Sarah woke up in their cabin, the sheets cold beside her. She sat up, confused. David wasn't there. Emily's small bed was empty too. Panic set in immediately. Maybe they had gone for a late-night snack. Maybe Emily had woken up from a bad dream, and David had taken her for a walk to calm her down. But deep in her gut, something felt wrong. She threw on a jacket and hurried out, searching the hallways, the deck, the dining areas. The ship was quieter at this hour, the usual energy replaced by the soft hum of the ocean and the distant murmur of late-night conversations. Her heart pounded as she checked every possible place they could be. But there was no sign of them. By the time she reached the security desk, her hands were shaking. She tried to keep her voice steady as she explained the situation, but the officer's expression shifted from patient concern to something more serious as he radioed other crew members. Within minutes, a full search was underway. They checked their cabin again. The ship's security cameras. The emergency exits. Nothing. It was as if David and Emily had simply disappeared. Sarah refused to believe it. People didn't just vanish. Not on a cruise ship. Not with hundreds of other passengers and staff around. She demanded answers, but all she got were theories. Maybe David had taken Emily to an early port stop. Maybe they had fallen overboard. Maybe, but no real explanation. Days passed, and Sarah remained on the ship as authorities searched. The cruise line cooperated, the crew reviewed every possible lead, but no trace of David or Emily was found. No one remembered seeing them leave the ship. No life jackets were missing. The cameras near the exits showed nothing unusual. It was like they had been erased. When the ship finally docked back home, Sarah was the only one who walked off alone. She was met with reporters, detectives, and endless questions she had no answers to. The investigation dragged on for months, then years. Leads went cold. Witnesses forgot details. Eventually, people moved on. But Sarah never did. For 7 years, she searched. She spent every penny hiring private investigators, following rumors, and chasing dead ends. She refused to believe they were gone. She refused to accept that her family had simply disappeared into nothingness. The world called her obsessed. Delusional. But she knew, deep down, that there was more to the story. And then, one evening, as she walked down a quiet alley on her way home from work, something stopped her in her tracks. A figure. A man standing near a dimly lit doorway, his face shadowed by the flickering light above. Sarah's breath caught. Because even though 7 years had passed, she would recognize him anywhere. David. Older, thinner, but undeniably him. And beside him, barely visible in the darkness, was a young girl. Emily. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. She opened her mouth to call out to them, to scream, to run toward them, but then, David turned. His eyes met hers for the briefest moment. And instead of relief or recognition, there was fear. He grabbed Emily's hand. And then, before Sarah could move, they disappeared into the shadows. Sarah's legs felt like they were frozen in place, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. 7 years of searching, of wondering, of agonizing over every possibility, and now, in the most unexpected of places, she had found them. But why had David run? Why had he looked at her with fear instead of relief? And why was Emily, her little girl, Still a child when she should have been a teenager by now? The questions swirled in her head as she forced herself to move. Her heart pounded as she ran toward the alley where they had disappeared. The street was mostly empty, the few pedestrians around completely unaware of the earth-shattering moment that had just taken place in Sarah's world. She reached the darkened corner where David and Emily had vanished, her eyes darting in every direction. A single door stood slightly ajar, its chipped paint and rusted handle suggesting it hadn't been used in years. She hesitated for only a second before pushing it open, stepping into the dimly lit space beyond. The scent of damp concrete and dust filled her nostrils. The air was thick with something else, something unexplainable. The room appeared to be part of an abandoned building, but the faint sound of footsteps echoed ahead. She followed them, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "David," she called out, her voice breaking. "Emily." Silence. She moved forward, her fingers grazing the cold brick walls for balance. A single flickering light bulb illuminated the hallway ahead, casting long, shifting shadows. The space felt endless, like a maze designed to confuse anyone who entered. And then, just as suddenly as she had seen them, they were gone. The footsteps had faded, the door at the end of the hall slightly open but leading to nothing but darkness. Tears blurred her vision. How was this possible? Had she imagined it? No. She had seen them. Felt them. This was real. Her mind reeled back to the night they had vanished. Every moment she had replayed in her head 1,000 times. The unanswered questions. The missing footage from the ship's cameras. The theories that had never quite made sense. What had happened to them that night? And why did it feel like she had just seen ghosts? She forced herself to think rationally. If David and Emily were here, then they had to be somewhere close. She needed help. Stepping back outside, she reached for her phone with trembling fingers. She hesitated. Who could she even call? The police? What would she even say that her husband and daughter, who had been missing for 7 years, had suddenly appeared in a random alley and then disappeared again? They would think she had lost her mind. She swallowed hard, her pulse still racing. She had to find them herself. Over the next few days, Sarah returned to the alley at different times, hoping, praying that she would see them again. She watched the streets, studied the people who passed by, trying to recognize any familiar face. But there was nothing. Then, one evening, she noticed something strange. A man. Not David, but someone else, someone who seemed to be watching the alley just as she was. He stood near a streetlight, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Every time Sarah glanced in his direction, he seemed to shift his position slightly, as if trying to remain unnoticed. Her stomach twisted with unease. Was he connected to David and Emily? Was he following them? Or worse, was he following her? Determined, she took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Excuse me," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "Have you seen a man and a little girl around here?" The man's eyes flickered with something, recognition, hesitation, but he quickly masked it with indifference. "Sorry, lady. Can't help you." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "I think you can." He exhaled, glancing around as if checking for anyone nearby. Then, in a low voice, he muttered, "You should stop looking. It's safer that way." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "What do you mean? Are they in danger?" But before she could press him for more, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Sarah with more questions than before. The words haunted her. "You should stop looking. It's safer that way." Safer for who? And from what? That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's face, the way he had looked at her like he was afraid of her. Like she was the threat. But why? What had happened to them? And why had Emily not aged a single day in 7 years? Sarah knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stop looking. Not now. Not ever. Sarah couldn't shake the man's warning. His words echoed in her mind, making her question everything. Why would it be safer if she stopped looking? Who was trying to keep her from finding David and Emily? And why did it seem like they didn't want to be found? She spent the next few days retracing her steps, hoping to catch even the slightest clue that might lead her back to them. She started by asking around the alley where she had seen them. Shopkeepers, street vendors, even the homeless man who sat at the corner every evening, no one had seen a man with a young girl. It was like they had disappeared into thin air. The frustration clawed at her, making her feel like she was losing control. But then, on the fourth night, something changed. She was walking past a small cafe when she noticed a reflection in the glass. A figure. Standing across the street. Watching her. It was the same man who had warned her before. Sarah's pulse quickened. This time, she wasn't going to let him slip away. She turned abruptly, crossing the street with determined strides. The man noticed and instantly started walking in the other direction. "Wait," she called after him, but he ignored her. She quickened her pace. He did the same. Soon, they were both almost running through the quiet streets. Sarah pushed herself forward, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She couldn't let him escape. Finally, as he rounded a corner, she lunged forward and grabbed his arm. "Who are you?" she demanded, her grip tightening. "Why are you following me?" The man yanked his arm free, glancing around nervously. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he muttered. "Then explain it to me," Sarah pleaded. "My husband and daughter have been missing for 7 years. I saw them. I need to know the truth." The man exhaled sharply, hesitating. "Then," he whispered, "they were never supposed to come back." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" The man shook his head. "They aren't the same people you lost. And if you keep searching, you'll put yourself in danger. You need to let them go." "Tell me what happened to them," Sarah insisted, her voice shaking. The man glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in slightly. "There are people who don't want you to find them. They've been watching you ever since you started asking questions. If you keep pushing, they'll come for you too." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "Who are they?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he slipped a small, folded piece of paper into her hand. "Read this when you're alone," he said before turning and disappearing into the darkness. Sarah stood there for a long moment, her fingers gripping the note tightly. When she finally unfolded it, the words sent a chill down her spine. "Go to Pier 27 at midnight. Come alone." Her hands trembled. She had spent years searching for answers, but now, standing at the edge of something bigger than she had ever imagined, she felt fear creeping in. What had happened to David and Emily? And was she truly ready to find out? Sarah stood at the edge of the alley, staring at the note in her trembling hands. The weight of its message pressed down on her chest. "Go to Pier 27 at midnight. Come alone." Every instinct told her it was a trap, but after 7 years of searching, she couldn't turn away now. This was the closest she had ever come to real answers. The hours dragged by as she prepared herself. She packed lightly, just her phone, a small flashlight, and a pocket knife she hadn't used in years. It wasn't much, but it gave her a small sense of control over the unknown. As midnight approached, she hailed a cab and gave the driver the address. The streets were eerily quiet, and the closer they got to the pier, the more deserted the area became. It was as if the city itself was warning her to turn back. When the car stopped, she hesitated before stepping out. The pier stretched out into the dark waters, its wooden planks creaking under her feet. A single lamppost flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows. She could hear the distant sound of waves lapping against the shore, but the air was thick with silence, an unnatural kind that made her pulse quicken. She walked slowly, scanning the area for any sign of life. Then, in the dim light, she saw a figure standing near the edge of the dock. It was the man who had given her the note. He was facing the water, his hands in his pockets, unmoving. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped closer. "You came," he said without turning around. "I need to know the truth," she said firmly. "Where are David and Emily?" The man exhaled heavily, then finally turned to face her. His eyes, shadowed by the dim lighting, held a strange mixture of sympathy and fear. "They were taken," he said. "Not by accident. Not by the sea. By people who don't want them to be found." Sarah's stomach clenched. "Who?" The man hesitated, glancing around nervously. "They called it an accident, but it wasn't. That cruise ship, there were things happening on board that weren't meant to be seen. Your husband, he found something. Something he wasn't supposed to. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. And Emily. The man's expression darkened. She was leverage. To keep him quiet. To make him disappear. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Where are they now? The man hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. He handed it to her without a word. With shaky fingers, she unfolded it. Her breath hitched. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the faces. It was David and Emily. Alive. They were standing in what looked like a marketplace, surrounded by unfamiliar buildings. But something was off. David's face was different. Not in a way that time would change, but in a way that seemed intentional. His hair was cut short, his expression guarded. Emily, now older, stood beside him, clutching his hand tightly, her eyes wary. They looked different, but it was them. Sarah's head spun. Where was this taken? South America, the man said. But they don't stay in one place for long. They're being moved constantly. Sarah's mind raced. Why? Why keep them hidden for so long? The man looked at her, his expression grim. Because David knows something that could destroy powerful people. And they won't let him escape again. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Her husband and daughter were alive, but they were prisoners in a game she didn't understand. She had spent 7 years searching, and now she was closer than ever. But with every step forward, the danger grew. She clutched the photograph tightly, her pulse pounding. She had a choice to make. Walk away and stay safe, or keep pushing, no matter the cost. Deep down, she already knew the answer. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. Sarah clutched the photograph, her fingers tightening around the edges as she tried to steady her breathing. The image of David and Emily older, changed, but undeniably them burned into her mind. They were alive. After 7 years of endless searching, endless heartbreak, they were out there. But they were still in danger, still trapped in whatever nightmare had taken them from her. She looked up at the man, her heart pounding. Who are you? She asked. Why are you helping me? The man exhaled slowly, his gaze flickering toward the dark waters beside the pier. Because I owe David, he said. He saved my life once. And now, I have to return the favor. Sarah narrowed her eyes. Saved you from what? The man hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. His voice dropped lower. That cruise ship wasn't just a vacation getaway. It was a front for something much bigger. David stumbled into something he shouldn't have, and when they realized he knew too much, they made him disappear. But before they took him, he got me out. Told me to run. I barely made it off that ship alive. Sarah's pulse quickened. Who are they? The man shook his head. Powerful people. People who don't forgive. People who don't forget. A chill ran down her spine. Then why are you still here? The man met her gaze, his expression hardening. Because they don't know I am. Sarah swallowed hard. The weight of what he was saying settled into her chest like a stone. If these people were as dangerous as he claimed, then she wasn't just fighting against time, she was fighting against an enemy who had already erased her family once. And if they found out she was getting close, they wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Her grip tightened on the photograph. How do I find them? The man hesitated, then pulled out a small, worn notebook from his jacket. He flipped through the pages before tearing one out and handing it to her. This is the last place I tracked them to. It's not a guarantee, but it's a start. Sarah took the paper and unfolded it. A name and location were scrawled in messy handwriting. Bogotá, Colombia. A name she didn't recognize, Marco Valdez. Who is this? She asked. The man's jaw tightened. Someone who knows the people who took them. Someone who might be able to tell you where they are now. Sarah's chest tightened. 7 years of unanswered questions, and now, finally, she had a name. A real lead. But something about the man's expression made her uneasy. What aren't you telling me? She asked. The man looked at her, his face grim. Marco Valdez doesn't just know them. He works for them. Sarah's stomach dropped. You're sending me straight to the people who took them? The man shook his head. I'm sending you to someone who might be your only chance at finding them. But you have to be careful. If he figures out why you're there, you won't make it out. Sarah stared at the paper, her hands trembling. Bogotá. It felt surreal. After all these years, she had a real destination. A real chance. But the stakes were higher than ever. If she made the wrong move, she could disappear just like David and Emily. She took a deep breath and looked back up at the man. Why are you trusting me with this? The man held her gaze. Because David never gave up on me. I owe him. And because I know you won't stop. Sarah swallowed hard. He was right. She wasn't going to stop. No matter what it took. But as she turned away from the pier, gripping the paper tightly in her hand, she had no idea that someone was already watching her. Hidden in the shadows, a pair of eyes followed her every move. And as she disappeared into the night, a single phone call was made. She's getting too close. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped off the plane in Bogotá, gripping the small piece of paper with Marco Valdez's name scrawled across it. The humid air wrapped around her, thick with unfamiliar scents, as she forced herself to stay calm. She had come too far to turn back now. David and Emily were still out there, and she was running out of time. She navigated through the crowded streets, her eyes scanning every face, every shadow. She knew she was being followed. The uneasy feeling had settled in her chest the moment she left the airport, a presence lurking just beyond her line of sight. She tightened her grip on her bag and kept walking, pretending not to notice. If they wanted to make a move, she would be ready. Marco Valdez's name had led her to a dimly lit bar tucked away in a narrow alley. The neon sign flickered, barely illuminating the entrance. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was filled with smoke and murmured conversations. A few heads turned in her direction, but most quickly lost interest. She spotted him instantly, a man sitting alone at the back, his dark eyes watching her even before she reached his table. He didn't look surprised to see her. That sent a shiver down her spine. You've come a long way, Sarah. His voice was deep, calm, almost amused. She froze. You know who I am? Marco leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink. Of course. People like me. We keep track of loose ends. Her stomach twisted. Where are they? She demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Marco studied her for a moment before setting his drink down. You really don't know what you're up against, do you? Sarah's patience snapped. She reached into her bag, pulling out the photograph of David and Emily. They're alive, she said. I need to know where they are. Marco exhaled slowly, glancing at the photo before looking back at her. And what will you do if I tell you? I'll get them back, she said without hesitation. Marco's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's what David said too. Her breath caught. You've seen him? Marco nodded, his expression unreadable. And the girl? A flood of emotions surged through her, relief, fear, desperation. Where? She pressed. Marco hesitated, then leaned in closer. They were never meant to disappear, he said quietly. They were meant to be erased. Sarah's blood ran cold. You don't understand, Marco continued. This isn't about money. It's not about ransom. Your husband got in the way of something bigger than you can imagine. When the ship docked that night, he should have never stepped off. But he did. And they've been trying to correct that mistake ever since. Her hands clenched into fists. Where are they? She demanded again. Marco studied her for a long moment, then finally, he sighed. They're being moved tonight. Sarah's breath caught. Moved? Marco nodded. There's a facility. Outside the city. High security. No one gets in. No one gets out. She felt like the room was closing in around her. Then how do I stop it? Marco was silent for a moment before he reached into his pocket and slid something across the table. A key. This will get you into the outer gate, he said. After that, you're on your own. Sarah hesitated. Why are you helping me? Marco's gaze darkened. Because I owe David too. And because I know what it's like to lose everything. She took the key, her mind racing. This was it. Her only chance. Night fell quickly as Sarah found herself outside a heavily guarded compound on the outskirts of Bogotá. The towering fence loomed in front of her, floodlights cutting through the darkness. She forced herself to stay hidden, watching the guards, counting their movements. The key Marco had given her would get her through the first gate, but after that, she was on her own. Her heart pounded as she slipped inside, moving quickly through the shadows. Every step felt like a lifetime. Every noise sent her pulse skyrocketing. And then she saw them. David. Emily. They were being led across a courtyard, flanked by 2 guards. Her breath caught in her throat. They looked exhausted but alive. Emily clung to her father's arm, her face buried in his side. Sarah's chest tightened. She had to act now. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the small knife she had taken from Marco's bar. She wasn't leaving without them. Before she could make her move, a voice behind her sent ice through her veins. You really thought you could walk in here and take them back? Sarah spun around, heart hammering. A man stood in the shadows, his face partially illuminated by the floodlights. She recognized him instantly. It was the same man from the cruise. The one who had taken them. His lips curled into a cruel smile. We've been expecting you. Everything happened in an instant. Sarah lunged, but he was faster. A sharp pain shot through her side as she was shoved against the wall, her breath leaving her in a painful gasp. You should have stayed away, he hissed. Sarah's vision blurred, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She wasn't done. She couldn't be. A sudden shout rang through the air. A struggle broke out near the courtyard. She turned her head just in time to see David fighting one of the guards, knocking him to the ground. Hope surged through her. They were fighting back. Summoning every ounce of strength, she twisted in the man's grip, slamming her elbow into his ribs. He let out a grunt, just enough of a distraction for her to break free. David saw her. Their eyes met across the chaos. Sarah, he breathed, disbelief and relief crashing over his face. She didn't hesitate. She ran toward him, grabbing Emily in her arms. We have to go, she shouted. Alarms blared. More guards rushed toward them. But they had come too far to stop now. Together, they ran. The night air was thick with tension as Sarah, David, and Emily ran, their footsteps pounding against the hard ground. Behind them, alarms blared, and shouts echoed in the distance. Sarah's heart raced, her grip on Emily tightening as they moved through the darkened compound, desperate to find a way out. David led the way, his eyes scanning their surroundings. This way, he called, pulling Sarah toward a side gate. It was locked, but Marco's key had worked once before, maybe it would work again. Sarah fumbled with it, her hands shaking as she shoved it into the lock. A loud click sounded, and the gate creaked open just as a flashlight beam swept across the yard. Go, David urged, pushing Sarah and Emily through first. He followed, slamming the gate behind them. They were out, but they weren't safe yet. A narrow dirt road stretched ahead, leading into dense forest. It was their only option. The 3 of them ran until their lungs burned, pushing forward through the thick vegetation. Twigs snapped beneath their feet, and branches scratched against their skin, but they didn't stop. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, swallowed by the jungle's endless darkness. After what felt like an eternity, they reached an old, rusted vehicle hidden among the trees. Sarah turned to David, confusion in her eyes. Marco, he explained between heavy breaths. He told me to look for it if we ever got out. Sarah didn't hesitate. She helped Emily into the back seat while David fumbled with the wires beneath the dashboard. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. Relief washed over Sarah as David hit the gas, sending them speeding away from the compound. For the first time in 7 years, they were free. As they drove through the winding roads, exhaustion set in. Emily leaned against Sarah, her small body trembling. Sarah ran her fingers through her daughter's tangled hair, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It's over, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Emily or herself. David's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Not yet. Sarah glanced at him, catching the flicker of determination in his eyes. What do you mean? He exhaled sharply. They won't stop looking for us. She knew he was right. Whatever David had discovered all those years ago was still a threat to the people behind the operation. They had been willing to erase an entire family to keep it buried. We need to disappear, David said firmly. For good this time. Sarah swallowed hard. The thought of running again, of living in the shadows, made her stomach turn. But looking at Emily, seeing the fear still lingering in her eyes, she knew they had no other choice. Marco had anticipated this. Before they left Bogotá, he handed them a folder filled with new identities, plane tickets, and enough money to start over. Make it count, he had told them. And don't look back. Sarah wanted to thank him, to promise she'd never forget what he had done, but before she could speak, he was gone. 2 days later, in a quiet town far from the chaos, Sarah stood on a small balcony overlooking the ocean. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Behind her, David played with Emily, their laughter filling the air. For the first time in years, she felt peace. She knew the past would always linger, that the scars of what they had endured would never fully fade. But as she watched her family, whole, safe, together, she realized something. They had won. They had survived. And no matter what happened next, they would face it together.